70,000 people are here, and then Bob Dylan is the reason for it.
Inspired by their true story.
For anyone who's gonna hold your attention on a stage, you have to kind of be a freak.
Are you a freak?
Hope so.
And starring Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan. He defied everyone.
Turn it down!
Play loud!
To change everything.
Make some noise, BD.
Timothée Chalamet, Edward Norton, Elle Fanning, Monica Barbaro. A complete unknown. Only in theaters Christmas Day. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parent.
How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 2.
My fellow Americans, welcome. It's Eric Erickson here across the United States of America. The phone number is 877-973-7425. If you want to be on the program, I would love to have you. If you would do me a favor and text the word Army to the number 33777, I'm going to send you a link back. You click that link, and it's going to ask you for your first name, your last name, your zip code, and your email address. Those are the required fields. There are some others you don't have to put in, but zip code, email, those you do. Now, here's why I want you to do this. As we're trying to go around the country and do more in the next year we're now from, the coast of Oregon and Sacramento, California to Connecticut and South Florida. The show has spread. Grand Forks, North Dakota, Springfield, Illinois, Austin, Texas, Phoenix and Tucson, Las Vegas. So when we start doing these events, I want to be able to email you, make it very easy because you don't listen to the radio every day. And just say, hey, we're going to be in your area. Come hang out with us. And we'll be doing the gathering next year around the country as well. So make it easy for us to be able to stay in touch with you so you know what's going on days you might have missed it on radio that we're coming to your area. I want to talk to you about history. There is a historic point that needs to be raised. Before I get there, let me go on a tangent. I mentioned this the other day. Need to mention it again. I would be a billionaire. Right now, I would be a billionaire if I got a penny, just a single penny, every time someone asked me, why doesn't the Trump campaign do X? Or a variation of that question. I don't understand. I have frustrations. I think they're doing better. I think they're finding their footing. I think that the message still needs to be tweaked, and I am concerned, as I said yesterday, that it feels very much like me to be live at the Improv, that they are in real time improvising a campaign against Kamala Harris. And that's not a good way to run a campaign. That gets me back to this historic moment. In the last 188 years of this country's history, only one person has served as vice president of the United States and immediately transitioned into the presidency. So we're not talking, for example, Richard Nixon, who lost after Dwight Eisenhower to John F. Kennedy. He came back later and won. But only George H.W. Bush in 1988 was able to get elected president immediately after being vice president. The last time that it happened was 1836, Martin Van Buren getting elected president of the United States. Teddy Roosevelt, Calvin Coolidge, Harry Truman, Lyndon Johnson, Gerald Ford, they all assumed the presidency because of the death or resignation of the incumbent, and then they ran. Only George H.W. Bush ran and he ran as Ronald Reagan's third term. He explicitly ran as Ronald Reagan's third term. Read my lips, no new taxes. That was his pledge. The moment he broke it, campaign was over. Republicans were so disloyal to him after that. Yeah, people forget the history there. Now, look, I met him once. He was a very nice man. I did not know him or Barbara Bush very well. I did meet them once, and they were just as nice and charming as could be. I know people who knew them very well. But George H.W. Bush in 1980 ran against Ronald Reagan, as did like every major Republican. John Anderson, Bob Dole, Howard Baker, George H.W. Bush. They all ran to stop Ronald Reagan, and the effect was they diluted themselves, and Reagan consolidated conservatives. Reagan got the nomination and picked George H.W. Bush to bring the establishment wing of the party to him. And he won. George H.W. Bush had decried Reaganomics as voodoo economics and then embraced it. And in 1988, stood on the campaign stage and said, read my lips, no new taxes. Ronald Reagan was leaving office with majority popular support in this country, 60% favorability for Ronald Reagan when he left office. People went with George H.W. Bush. The media at the time, it was kind of the first campaign I have a mild recollection of. I was still a kid. But the media at the time, like no one since Martin Van Buren's been able to pull this off. And Bush, for most of the campaign trail, was not good on the campaign trail. Michael Dukakis seemed to be doing well. Then Dukakis made some fatal flaws. One, Michael Dukakis rejected Ronald Reagan's economic record, which was why Reagan had a 60-plus popular approval rating, and Michael Dukakis rejected the thing that was giving Reagan his popularity. Two, Michael Dukakis wore that full helmet in the tank, and it became visual optics of a man outclassed compared to George H.W. Bush, who had been an actual hero in World War II. George H.W. Bush had been a pilot who was shot down in the Pacific, and those around him were eaten by sharks or captured by the Japanese and murdered. He was able to survive and was rescued by a submarine and got back to base and immediately started flying again. They wouldn't let him go back into the war zone, but he was hell-bent on doing it, but the war ended before he could. He had been the director of the CIA, the ambassador to China, the chairman of the RNC, vice president of the United States. He knew his way around. And he was a shrewd political operator, and Michael Dukakis then had the fatal flaw of his campaign. Michael Dukakis had let out of prison a man named Willie Horton on a weekend furlough. The man was allowed out of prison and killed someone. Bush capitalized on that to show that Michael Dukakis, being a good liberal, was weak on crime. And you know what happened? Michael Dukakis, on a debate stage, was asked by then CNN's Bernard Shaw if someone murdered his wife, Kitty Dukakis, did that person deserve the death penalty? And he said absolutely not. Solidified his weak on crime status, coupled with Willie Horton, the stupid helmet on his head, his rejection of Reagan's record. Michael Dukakis, the governor of Massachusetts, went down in flames, and George H.W. Bush got elected. The third term of Ronald Reagan on no new tax, win the Cold War pledge. He won the Cold War, the Berlin Wall fell, and then he raised taxes. He was also a war hero who won the Gulf War. Psychologically, it was the first major military fight after Vietnam, and we won it decisively in a matter of days. And it revitalized American military might and imaging in the world as the Cold War fell, and it was clear we were the only superpower. In 1990, after agreeing to raise taxes, Republicans received a memo from Ed Rollins, who was the then executive director of the National Republican Congressional Committee, and it essentially told them, you've got to campaign against George H.W. Bush. So those Republicans campaigned against George H.W. Bush, and they were able to save themselves, many of them. But it got George H.W. Bush furious with them. So Bush then wins the Gulf War, and his popularity, I'm not making this up, goes up to over 90%. Most popular president in American history since George Washington. That sounds like a bit of an exaggeration, I realize, because there wasn't popular opinion polling when George Washington was president, but George Washington was unanimously made president of the United States, and George H.W. Bush, at a time where no one doubts American public opinion polling was actually pretty good because everybody had a landline phone and that's what you called. You got pretty good sampling. George H.W. Bush had over 90% approval. In fact, George H.W. Bush's approval was so good that he leveraged that with House Republicans and told them, you've got to fire Ed Rollins or I'm not going to campaign for you. I'm going to campaign against you in primaries. So the National Republican Congressional Committee fired Ed Rollins, and many of those Republicans who had campaigned against George H.W. Bush's tax cuts had to suck up to him. And he went down in flames because the economy cratered. People thought they were getting the third term of Ronald Reagan, and instead they got the term of George H.W. Bush. Milquetoast, establishment Republican who thought Reaganomics was voodoo economics, never really changed his mind, put David Souter on the Supreme Court, and the rest is history. He got beat by Bill Clinton. It is really hard for an incumbent vice president to win election. Bush did it because of Reagan's popularity, and when people realized this wasn't going to be the third term of Ronald Reagan, but the one term of George H.W. Bush, they threw George H.W. Bush out of office. Here comes Kamala Harris now. Reagan left office with a 60% approval rating. Joe Biden, in the polling averages now, has a 56% disapproval rating. Kamala Harris is fighting history, not just fighting Trump. To the extent that Kamala Harris is able to win, it's going to be because not just the press is on her side, because the press is always on the left side. It's that the Trump campaign is unable to seed a dynamic to remind people she's the Harris in the Biden-Harris campaign. And she's the Harris in the Biden-Harris administration. It's going to be political malpractice to do otherwise. In 1968, Hubert Humphrey ran for president of the United States. Hubert Humphrey was the vice president for Lyndon Johnson, who was so unpopular, he started to run for president and then walked away in the middle of the primaries. Biden is actually less popular than Lyndon Johnson was when he walked away from the campaign. And it wasn't the Johnson-Humphreys administration. It was just the Johnson administration. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have explicitly decided to tie themselves together as the Biden-Harris administration, making her a co-architect of the issues. The press has seized on a talking point that the Trump campaign is trying to tie Kamala Harris to the Biden administration. They don't have to tie her to anything. They tied themselves together with a hyphen. And to the extent the press tries to do that, the Republicans should attack the press as being dishonest. You can speak loudly about this. You can make this a key, strong point for the GOP. Again, this is very important. In 188 years, only one person, George H.W. Bush, was able to go from the vice presidency directly to the presidency without the incumbent president dying or resigning, but getting elected in his own right. It's hard because people tend to be ready for a change, and people are ready for a change from Joe Biden. So to the extent that the Trump campaign makes the case that Kamala Harris is part of the Biden-Harris administration, forget the polling right now, the post-Harris honeymoon period. Over the next 2 months, the message has got to be from the GOP that she's the Harris in the Biden-Harris administration, and she owns this too. She shouldn't be campaigning for president. She should be apologizing for what she and Joe Biden have done to people. If the Trump team can make that case, they should win.
Hey, Atlanta, Apple is open for small business. That's right. We're here to make starting and running your business simpler. With privacy and security built in on all devices, it's easy for you to protect your customers' data. And if you need hardware or software support, you'll get advice from business experts at no cost whatsoever. So you can focus more on the soup du jour and less on, the other stuff. At Apple, we're open for your small business. Go to apple.com/small business or visit an Apple store to learn more.
Welcome back. It's Eric Erickson here. The phone number 877-973-7425. Let's go to Brent waiting patiently. Brent, welcome.
Hey, how are you, Eric?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing fine. You're one of my very favorite conservative talk radio shows. I follow you. I listen to you. I respect the heck out of you, sir.
Thank you.
I am an international business person. I travel all over the world. And, Eric, every country that I have stepped foot in is having a much worse time with inflation and the cost of housing and the cost of food than we are. I don't know any nation that is doing incredible where the middle class is saying that they're saving a ton of money. The middle class is slipping all over the world. This is not just an American problem.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It's not just an American problem, but it's also a problem because a lot of countries did what this country did and dumped a lot of money into their economies. And in this country, Larry Summers warned Joe Biden not to do what he did. In fact, saying in his op-ed that you're doing a stimulus plan that overstimulates the economy, that dumps some money in, just not the amount that you did. So, yeah, it's absolutely true. Other nations on planet Earth are also having inflationary problems, but also...
What about the economists? What about the economists that are saying that Trump's plan is going to create a bigger problem?
Look, I got concerns with that, particularly the tariff issue. But he's not president right now, Brent. So we're dealing with Joe Biden's inflation. I got serious problems with Trump. Anybody who's a regular listener knows, particularly the tariff idea, I think is a ridiculous idea, and it's not going to solve problems. It's actually going to cause massive inflation.
It's supposed to help, and it's done nothing but increase the. I mean, I don't understand. That 25% that I pay. Guess who pays for that 25%?
I'm assuming you do. Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
I pay it, but I pass that on to the. I have to include that into the cost of goods.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that's my problem with the Trump tariffs. But Brent, we can get to the Trump tariffs when Trump becomes president. Right now, we're dealing with the fact that Larry Summers actually wrote an op-ed before Biden got in office saying you're putting too much money into the economy. And other countries did the exact same thing Joe Biden did. Everybody got inflation. Larry Summers told them they would. And, Joe Biden could actually walk back money, that unspent stimulus money and other issues of money that are put into the economy, solve the inflation problem. But instead, he's relying on the Fed to jack up interest rates, hurting American homeowners. This isn't hard. I'm not a British citizen. I'm an American concerned about Joe Biden's policies and what he did. I'm concerned about bank cancellations around the country as well. There's this growing movement of progressives to buy stock in banks and then use their equity in those banks to force banks to become progressive and to, for example, prohibit people from buying guns with their debit cards and things like that. Old Glory Bank was started because of the debanking trends. By conservatives, for conservatives. They're a great bank. You can have an account with Old Glory Bank. The moment they came online last year, I got an account with them. I got a checking account. I got a savings account. And I never have I been charged a fee. Why? Because they have no fee checking, no fee savings. They have business accounts. You can do mortgages. You can do loans. OldGloryBank.com. OldGloryBank.com. Member FDIC, equal housing lender. Terms and conditions apply. You should go check them out if you want an account for yourself, if you want an account for your kid. You can get no fee checking, no fee savings. You can build a relationship with them, get loans, mortgages, whatever you need. Again, equal housing lender, member FDIC. Terms and conditions apply. OldGloryBank.com.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. The holidays are here, and you know what that means. It's time to get your friends and family the gifts they deserve. Take the stress out of shopping with Amazon's great deals and low prices on a huge range of items from toys to tech and much more. Whoever you're gifting for, Amazon has great prices on everything you need this holiday season. Shop Amazon for all your gifting needs.
Greetings, my friends. How are you? The full number is 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, I would be absolutely delighted to have you. As always, if you text ERIC, E-R-I-C-K, to 33777, you can get the live stream, the show notes, all that. By the way, I got to say, I got a note from my publisher who said sales of my book, You Shall Be As Gods, have slowed, and they would love to rev it up. If you haven't gotten a copy yet, if you text the word data to 33777, you click the second link, and you can order a copy of my book. If you click the first link, you can subscribe to the show notes. Shameless self-promotion here. All right. Got to move on to other things. Robert Gates served as the last Secretary of Defense for George W. Bush and the first Secretary of Defense for Barack Obama. By all accounts, across administrations, he was a good and competent Secretary of Defense who was not a partisan. He was a political operator who both sides had some faith in, and he had a great working relationship with Barack Obama, even though he had been George Bush's Secretary of Defense. One of the things that the Bush administration did on their way out the door that I think history will look very favorably on it, and it's only been a few years since it got notice. But one of the things that the Bush administration did on their way out the door is they compiled foreign policy books for the incoming Obama administration, and essentially the relationships of every continent on every country in every continent. So the Obama administration, even if they wanted to chart a different direction, understood going in, here's who we've been talking to, here's what we've said. Here are the things we are concerned about with this country moving forward. Here are directions you may want to proceed. Here are where we know our policies conflict with yours, but where we think there's some common ground, here are people you can talk to. And it was actually a very good, very, very good, well-researched transfer of power, so that on the very first day of the Obama administration coming in, they had a binder from George W. Bush's office where if you needed to know what was the relationship like with the leaders in Egypt, here's what the relationship's like, here's American promises to them, here's their promises to us, here is what we're worried about behind the scenes, here's what our intelligence is telling us, things they don't know that you need to know in your dealings with them. Bob Gates was one of the people who spearheaded this project, understanding that the world was in turmoil still following 9/11, and Barack Obama was going to inherit some foreign policy conundrums that he would have to deal with. Bob Gates saw both administrations. And Bob Gates, the Secretary of Defense, uttered one of the most insightful quotes during that period of time, that Joseph R. Biden has been wrong about every major foreign policy decision for 50 years. That's Barack Obama's Secretary of Defense who said that. Joe Biden has been wrong about every major foreign policy decision in the last 50 years. Joe Biden opposed the raid that caught Osama bin Laden. Joe Biden supported handing over the Panama Canal. Joe Biden opposed attempts to rescue hostages from Iran. Joe Biden opposed the Reagan armament plans to bring down the Soviet Union. Joe Biden supported the invasion of Iraq. Joe Biden was unhappy with our attacks on Afghanistan after 9/11. Joe Biden has been wrong about every major foreign policy decision. Look at the fallout in Africa now. In Burkina Faso, the Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, who actually aren't natural allies, have joined up together and have massacred a ton of people. Joe Biden decided to diminish our force application in West Africa and to actually wind down our participation with African nations. He blew up the relationship, actually, and ruined the relationship pretty spectacularly and forced many of our American servicemen out of those areas of Africa where the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda are spreading. Joe Biden bailed on Afghanistan. You know, they're trying to blame Donald Trump now. They're trying to say that, well, Joe Biden had to do it because of Donald Trump, which is nonsense being allowed by the American Press Corps. Again, the American Press Corps is a willful participant for the Biden team and the Kamala Harris team and should be treated as the enemy. You should be beating them up, metaphorically speaking, of course, for allowing the nonsense to come forward that somehow Donald Trump was responsible for the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Then there's the peer. Turns out, behind the scenes, the military, the State Department, the Israelis, the United Nations, the third-party humanitarian operations, they all told Joe Biden the peer was a terrible idea. President Joe Biden approved the plan for delivering humanitarian aid to Gaza via a floating military pier despite warnings from within the U.S. government that rough waves could pose significant challenges and objections from officials who feared the operation would detract from a diplomatic push to compel Israel to open additional land routes into the war zone, according to an Inspector General report. The watchdog for the U.S. Agency for International Development, which oversees Washington's humanitarian work abroad, cited various external factors that it said impaired the agency's effort to distribute food and other supplies brought to Gaza over the pier. Among them, according to the report, were the security requirements imposed by the Pentagon to protect U.S. military personnel working aboard the structure just offshore. Multiple U.S. aid staff expressed concerns that the Biden administration's focus on the pier undercut the agency's advocacy for opening more land crossings, an approach, the report said, deemed more efficient and proving. Once the president issued the directive, the agency's focus was to use the pier as efficiently as possible. The pier was attached to Gaza's coastline in May amid rising concerns of famine that prompted the Pentagon to begin airdropping food into Gaza. But from the start, the mission was dogged by logistical and security setbacks, including rough seas that broke apart the structure, looting of aid trucks on land, and a persistent logjam moving food from a staging area ashore due to worries that Israeli bombardment would kill the workers tasked with distributing it. The operation was halted for good last month. Foreign governments said this was a bad idea. The United Nations, we now know, said it was a bad idea. The State Department said it was a bad idea. The Defense Department said it was a bad idea. Joe Biden said, go build it. He's the commander-in-chief. They complied. It was a bad idea. It convoluted routing for humanitarian aid. It slowed the delivery of humanitarian aid. Our soldiers and humanitarian workers came under attack from Hamas. Our vehicles were looted and plundered. It was a bad idea. Joe Biden has been wrong about every major foreign policy decision in the last 50 years. We should have never given up the Panama Canal. He was all about it because Jimmy Carter wanted it. We, of course, should have and did go in and get Osama bin Laden. He opposed that too. He opposed the Abraham Accords that brought peace across large parts of the Middle East that he himself today is benefiting from between Israel and other Muslim nations in the Middle East. Joe Biden is a moron, a highly educated idiot who believes his own press and who has been treated fabulously by the press. Also, there's a hyphen. It's the Biden hyphen or dash Harris administration. Kamala Harris said she was the last person in the room with Joe Biden before the Afghan decision, and she stood by his decision. What about this? What about this? She tied to this decision. Does she agree with this decision? Is this one she supports? I mean, we know now that it was a terrible idea. Those of us on the right told you in the beginning it was a terrible idea. Military whistleblowers said this isn't going to work, and Biden chose to ignore them all, and the media chose to ignore them all because they wanted to give Joe Biden a win. They wanted to help Joe Biden quell disturbances in this country from the far left anti-Semites. And what happened is a waste of government funds and resources, and they helped very few people because the whole thing was garbage. A floating pier prone to wobbling on waves in a war zone where no one wants them. There will be no accountability, of course, from the press. There will be no accountability from anyone, really, because they got to protect the precious. So much of what's happened in the last several years has been about protecting the precious. The press corps in this country so despises the idea of Donald Trump becoming president again, they can't be honest, and they're destroying their own credibility. I've never seen an institution like the American press so willing to destroy themselves to protect their precious. Their precious is Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Their precious is really stopping Donald Trump. The amount of moral and intellectual bankruptcy being poured into this protectionism, it's gross. It's kind of scary, actually, how brazen they are in their lying. But now it's here really for everybody to see. It's here for everybody to pay attention to. Joe Biden was told repeatedly not to put that pier there. He didn't listen, just like he didn't listen in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, people died. There, thank God no one died because of it, but a lot of people starved who otherwise wouldn't have because Joe Biden didn't listen to how to do it. He just presumed he knew. As Bob Gates said, Joe Biden has been wrong about every major foreign policy decision in the last 50 years, including putting a pier in Gaza. You will be right to go to ericforhillsdale.com today and build a relationship with Hillsdale College. You get their podcast network on your favorite podcast app. You listen to Larry Arnn. Great, insightful conversations with people. You learn something every day. Get Imprimis completely for free delivered to your mailbox. I got an email from a listener today saying, hey, did you read this article in Imprimis? Yes, I did. I saved for the live read to tell you, because I know you're listening, that yes, I read the article you're referencing in Imprimis. You can get it completely for free, folks. All you got to do is go to ericforhillsdale.com, E-R-I-C-K, ericforhillsdale.com. You can also take free classes from Hillsdale College. They have, since the 1800s, made education, free education, a mission of theirs. They do not get federal or state subsidies for their colleges. Every kid gets a scholarship or works, and they provide quality content for Americans. That's not indoctrination, but quality education, and you can get so much of it for free, including Imprimis, including their podcast network, including many of their courses. Go to ericforhillsdale.com, E-R-I-C-K, ericforhillsdale.com. Go sign up for Imprimis, get the podcasts, improve your mind. It's like show prep for your mind. It's completely free. It's from Hillsdale College. Eric, E-R-I-C-K, ericforhillsdale.com.
Blinds.com Cyber Monday Last Chance is happening now. Don't miss out on up to 45% off site-wide. A Blinds.com design expert can help you make the perfect selection on your schedule. We can handle everything from measure to your whole home installed for one low cost. With over 25 million windows covered, Blinds.com is the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings. Save up to 45% site-wide, plus a free professional measure right now at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Welcome back. It's Eric Erickson here. Let me take Mike's phone call here. Mike, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, Eric. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, great. Well, first, thanks for having me on. Got a great show. I just wanted to make kind of one quick point to add to what you were saying about Kamala being tied to the Biden administration. You know, I mean, really the only reason she's there is because she's tied to the administration. How else did she get there? You know, she didn't get voted in there, right? So how is she not tied to the administration when she's there? How did she get there?
Right. It's remarkable that apparently she just kind of like Athena out of Zeus's head just sprang forth and just happened to be an object in the room as opposed to being literally Joe Biden's running mate as vice president of the United States in what we call the Biden-Harris administration. And by the way, it should be noted that until this administration, no one did that. It was not the Obama-Biden administration. It was not the Trump-Pence administration. It was not the Bush-Cheney administration. It was the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration. Go to those White House websites, all of them archived. You can see that for yourself. There were no hyphenated administrations, but this administration decided to hyphenate it. It's kind of remarkable, actually, that this is where we are, that the media itself is so fretful. And by the way, I got to say, in just all seriousness, the fact that the media is running from the Biden-Harris administration and trying to revise history is just another great indicator that everybody on the right should double down on this tie to her. The fact that they're running cover for her, because it does discredit the media as well. I am more and more convinced that the administration needs to be the press needs to be tied to the administration, that the press needs to be joined at the hip, so to speak, with the administration. That there's got to be a tie. There's got to be a willingness to recognize that the press is in this and covering for Biden and Harris, and it's got to be exposed on a regular basis. And the fact that they're willing to try to say Kamala Harris is not a part of the Biden administration, that she's not responsible because she was the second name, it's discrediting on them. And I increasingly believe you got to rough the refs. They're trying to cover. I mean, flat out, obvious, trying to cover for the Biden administration. They're doing everything they can. So they need to be roughed up. They need to be called out. And Kamala Harris needs to own the record. She needs to apologize to the American public for what this administration has done.